In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, hello everyone, and welcome to the new episode of the Fact series in which we discuss international political matters every week. This is Foad Mahdavi, and in this episode, I have the honor of being the host of John Steppling, writer and commentator from Norway. We are here to discuss the triangle of Corona crisis, the economic crisis, and anti-racist protests in the United States and its impact on presidential election. Thank you for joining us, John, and good to be with you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's get started with the current circumstances in the U.S. Where do this social tension and political uncertainty actually arise?
Well, the George Floyd murder served as a trigger, and we could spend a great deal of time discussing the history of racist policing in the United States. And I think that it is important to make clear, because I am finding that a number of people I know in Europe, who I respect and whose opinions I respect, don't grasp the extent of the problem with racist police departments in the U.S. I mean, they have no comprehension. Last year in Denmark, there were 0 civilians killed by police. Last year in the United States, there were 1,000. There is no country that is remotely close to the U.S. in terms of the police violence. And it extends beyond that. It's the entire criminal justice system. So this has gone on for quite a while. And with the advent of cameras on cell phones and everybody having access to video, and even some police wearing, body cameras, a lot of this violence started to get filmed, and that brought it to more people's attention. But it has gone on literally for decades and decades. The question is always, has it gotten worse? Well, possibly, probably. It is certainly epidemic proportions. I mean, and the George Floyd murder was a classic example. I mean, the U.S. police, domestic police departments, under Obama got the okay to be militarized. They were given handouts of used military equipment so that you had small police departments in Iowa or Michigan suddenly with, these huge military vehicles, mine-proof vehicles, and huge weaponry that was like that no police department needs. And then they received, usually from Israeli instructors who came over, they were taught what was essentially counterinsurgency techniques. So policing in the U.S., sort of, while its origins reside in slave patrols and the protection of property, they became militarized and officially, in a sense, became an occupying force in poor neighborhoods, especially in Black neighborhoods. And the entire criminal justice system reflects the racial inequality that is prevalent in the U.S. The policing budget is $100 billion. The prison budget is $80 billion plus. And so this Floyd murder triggered a number of things. And one of them was a movement to defund the police. And I'll get back to that because it's an important aspect of this. But you're talking about a population that had just suffered how many months of house arrest, essentially, because of the COVID virus. And they had lost jobs, they had lost livelihoods, and this is already a precarious economy in which homelessness is at biblical proportions. You go to any major city, Los Angeles being a good example, where I'm from, there are homeless on every street, and in certain areas you can find mile after mile of shantytown with homeless people, and that population is growing all the time. It's probably up to something approaching 1 million people now, if you take the whole county of Los Angeles. Those are staggering numbers. So it's growing because there are no jobs. People have run out of options. They're desperate. So here we have yet another police execution of a black man, unarmed. And it was just the straw that
Yeah.
broke the camel's back. I mean, it was people just enough. And because they were so desperate anyway, and this sort of official government immiseration of the working class, uh, saw these
Mhm.
protests erupt. And you've seen a kind of draconian police response to that. So those are the basic elements behind the social unrest. And of course you have a president who is pretty much clueless about everything, and wants to be
Exactly.
seen as the law and order president now. And so his response is always going to be the most punitive and least nuanced, and he panders to a far right uh, white nationalist base. I mean, those aren't really the people that got him elected, but they are the visible sign of "Make America Great Again,"
Mhm.
and that white anti-black racism is acute. I mean, it's a huge factor. Now, the one other thing that needs mentioning, coming back to the defunding the police, there were grassroots movements who have been arguing for the abolishment of prisons, defunding the police, even defunding the military, which of course would have to happen alongside defunding the police. Um, and this has gone on for 20 years. These people have been doing this for 20, 25 years. It's gaining traction now. But the
Exactly.
danger is that what may happen to those movements is that they are co-opted, appropriated, and that you will see a spike in privatized police. So you're going to see private security policing the streets of America, and that is possibly worse than the police that we have right now. So that's a question that I think the movement has to address and be aware of.
Uh, what effect can the simultaneous anti-racism protests with the corona crisis and the subsequent economic crisis that have formed the crisis triangle in the United States have on the US election process? And will these issues actually reduce Trump's chances of being reelected?
Well, I mean, my answer to that, because this has been a talking point for a few weeks now, uh, is that you have Trump versus Biden ostensibly. I mean, Biden doesn't officially have the nomination, and there's a real question if Biden is healthy enough, and there's a question if Trump is healthy enough, because they're both pretty old
Mhm.
guys and they're showing signs of dementia, frankly.
I
And
see. Yeah.
it would be comical if it weren't, of course, tragic. Um, I think that Trump will have to work very hard to lose the election. Biden is not an appealing option. People are just not going to vote probably. On the other hand, there is a genuine, kind of withering hatred of Trump in the U.S. I've never in my lifetime seen anything like the hatred of a public figure, a politician that you see against Trump. And yet, given the electoral system in the U.S., there's a good chance that he will be reelected, and that's a staggering reality to sort of ponder. But I think that there is a bigger question here, which is, just exactly how important are are the presidents? Who are they? They are largely
Mhm.
symbolic figures in a sense. U.S. foreign policy, for example, has not changed for 70, 80 years. Clinton to Bush to Obama, foreign policy was identical. I mean, it literally didn't change at all. The same targets were in place, the same imperialist agenda, NATO-US wars of aggression, 900 military bases around the world, a defense budget of $5 billion a day. It's extraordinary, and it props up the economy. So defense spending is going to continue, and both parties have supported defense spending. Everybody was, liberals, progressives were, sort of clutching their pearls and hand wringing about, oh, we have to have Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was an imperialist too, and he supported defense spending too. He was just kind of vaguely nicer about it somehow. You don't get to be a national nominee for one of the two big parties unless you are an imperialist, unless you sign off on that agenda, which has been in place, as I say, for 80 years. We have now, under Obama, we had Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, who was a hawk, who orchestrated coups in Ukraine and Honduras, destroyed Libya. Now we have Mike Pompeo, and, he has carried on, assassinated Suleiman in Iran, is arguably more aggressive about Iran and the U.S. military occupation of Syria and Venezuela and Bolivia. And Pompeo was a dominionist. This is the other thing, that Trump's cabinet is made up of dominionist Christians. These are radical Pentecostal fringe believers in the rapture and that the world needs to be run by white Christian men. And Mike Pence is a dominionist, Larry Kudlow is a dominionist, Rick Perry is a dominionist, on it goes. There's several more, and this somehow is not brought up very often in the media. And I remember when Pompeo was quickly, accepted as approved as Secretary of State, the New York Times ran a piece, Mike Pompeo balances faith and politics. I mean, it was this puff piece that tried to excuse away his own statements, which were virulently xenophobic, Islamophobic, racist. And so why would the New York Times do that? Why would the New York Times, that makes such noise about inclusion and diversity and all this, why would they apologize for, a nakedly racist and xenophobic and provincial rube like Mike Pompeo? I mean, that's a question I'd like to have an answer to. We have an election that is both very important and not very important. And I think that in terms of the countries that are targeted for sanctions by the United States, Iran and Syria and North Korea, all these places, Venezuela, Cuba, nothing's going to change regardless of who is elected. Joe Biden's not going to get in there and say, oh, let's embrace President Maduro and the people of Venezuela because we support the Bolivarian revolution. And that's not going to happen. And so to me, it doesn't matter very much. The only thing that matters, I suppose, if one were to juxtapose Biden and Trump, is that Trump so panders to this almost Klan-like aggressive white racism and says such astonishingly unstatesmanlike things. I mean, he conducts his presidency by Twitter. I mean, that's the level of things we have reached. And he knows nothing about anything, right? I mean, I don't think he could find Iran on a map. So that's problematic, and he has left a lot of positions of importance. He hasn't appointed people that he needed to fill positions, and he hasn't done that. The day-to-day running of the government has kind of ground to a halt. I know the U.S. Postal Service is in shocking disarray. Try to get a letter sent from the United States to Norway. You can't do it. I mean, and so So that's a problem. And the second thing is that there has never been a more pro-Israeli president than Trump, and he has a lot of people around him, advisors, unelected advisors, people like Eric Prince, the guy who ran Blackwater, which has since rebranded as something innocuous.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, Eric Prince wanted to be installed as viceroy, his term of Afghanistan. So
Mhm.
that's problematic with Trump. I mean, he is surrounded by by really extreme racist and militant figures. I mean, he had John Bolton in his administration for a while. So you don't get much worse than Pompeo and Bolton. So, and for that matter, Jim Mattis, the butcher of Fallujah. The election is, as I say, both important, but in a sense, it's not important. I don't see what would change exactly if Biden miraculously could get to the end of this race
Mhm.
intact and become the president, because he has a terrible record, a horrible record. And this is part of the despair, I think, and frustration in the working class in the U.S. Because the electoral system has failed them so dramatically that what are you left with? In France, the yellow vest protests um, were because people were left with nothing. They were desperate. They had no option, especially the rural agricultural workers in France. Um, they
I
had
see.
nothing else to do, and we're seeing that in the U.S. I mean, there's no health care, there's no jobs,
Yeah.
there's no anything, and people are at an end. They don't know what to do.
What is the role of money in the American capitalist system to gain power? Given the critical situation in the United States, can Trump, as in the past, bring people's votes by spending money?
Well, it's a given that you wealth is of vital importance if you are a national level politician. We see very rich men, from Mitt Romney to Bloomberg, to these people running for office out of their own pocket. But it, the other thing that is worth looking at here, which I think is a part answer to that question, is that um, there is another agenda here in the COVID, hysteria. I mean, this is a virus that pretty much now everybody has agreed is of very small lethality. It's, 0.002 or something, and nobody under the age of 80 dies from this. And as more is learned about it, the more this global lockdown has seemed unnecessary. Certain populations are more at risk. The elderly, people with comorbidities of some sort, respiratory ailments. Yes, it was a disaster to send people into hospitals on ventilators. Nursing homes were particularly vulnerable, and lots of people died. But all of this social distancing, mask wearing, kabuki theater that is going on, um, what is behind
Mhm.
that? Part of it is that Bill Gates essentially owns the World Health Organization now. He's the major donor, and he dictates policy. And Anthony Fauci is kind of the bag man for that, and the public face of it. Although Gates, you can't, he's on every media platform available now, and he has an agenda about vaccine, and he's a eugenicist, ideologically, essentially. And this is very dangerous. And this started to surface um, right before the COVID. There was a lot of kind of fear mongering about climate and conflicting ideas, and certain newspapers, the same ones that are most upset about COVID and fanning the flames of fear, were the ones that were fanning the flames of fear about climate change. Right? The Earth is going to die in 12 years, 20 years, 30 years. And people were getting
Yeah.
hysterical about that. Now it's this pandemic, it could wipe out everybody. I mean, the stuff that was said in the first weeks was extraordinary. Now, was this an honest mistake? I kind of doubt it. because there were voices of sanity suggesting that this was crazy, and they shut down schools, for instance. I mean, children are immune to
Mhm.
the COVID virus. No child got it essentially, and they didn't transmit it. So why were schools shut down? You know, but behind both of those things, is a lot of money, a lot of ruling class money, a lot of big media billionaires, including Gates, and uh, they they dream of somehow, and this is what William Burroughs warned 40 years ago. The late great William Burroughs said, "What they want is a global police state." Now that starts to sound like
Mhm.
conspiracy theory, but it's really not. Some form of that is what is on the table because Western economies are shot. You know, as I say, they're propped up by defense. So running through this
Yeah.
is a dream of like block cities and all of this stuff that sounds very fanciful, but people like Gates and his advisors and minions believe it. So and when you see the U.S. and U.K. in particular still insisting on a lockdown and mask wearing and social distancing, and that has destroyed, 26 million jobs were lost in the US. I mean, this is the worst depression in 100 years. It's worse than the one 100 years ago. And uh,
Mhm.
you know what is going on behind that? I mean, I don't know, but when I hear certain things and I see the money behind, new green capitalists, and um, they seem to align, all of these people that are trying to terrify people and keep them in lockdown and at home and out of contact with each other and disorganized, are the same people that were, demanding instant action on climate, which became a kind of green investment opportunity for the high net worth guys. And there's always symbolic faces to this. It was Greta, and now the pandemic has Anthony Fauci and whoever, and celebrities come out, and this is the danger of the media age in which we live. Guy Debord, warned of this, 40 years ago. The society of the spectacle, and that's what
Yeah.
we have. And nobody, I'm not a doctor, people don't know. They listen to what they hear on the media, and the media is not very honest. If you read what the media says about Venezuela or Iran or North Korea or Syria, it's mostly lies, and I think a good many people know this, and
Mhm.
this fuels the protest too. There's real anger um, that people are in such desperate straits when seemingly there's no reason for it.
Demonstrators are now calling for fundamental changes in all aspects of the country, from looking at historical figures to correcting police behavior, eliminating racial discrimination, and stopping economic inequality. What has been the response of each of the major US parties and their candidates to ensuring that the demands of the people are met? And what about the established government?
The U.S. Government, whoever ends up being in power after the next election, whether Democrats or Republicans, um, they are going to serve Wall Street and all the Silicon Valley and all of these billionaire class people, and they're going to be about
Mhm.
protecting capitalism essentially and protecting their property. Um, they will make a lot of noise and about you know inequality, and they're going to have all these programs that do nothing, um, as they have always done. I mean, those of us who are old enough to go back to the 60s remember all the different forms this sort of thing has taken, and the propaganda has only gotten more acute and actually more sophisticated. um, what has to
Mhm.
happen if the movement for change, if these protests are to amount to anything, and I would like to believe there's a chance that it will change certain things anyway. They're going to have to escalate the war machine. Disband NATO would be a good first step. Stop spending $5 billion every day on defense. So much of it is wasted. Um, and stop this racist domestic policing that costs 1,000 people their lives every year, and more than that, really. I mean, the criminal justice system is horrific in the United States,
Hmm.
and that has to change. The military police nexus that has to be not just defunded but abolished. I mean, it has to be replaced with something that is on a human scale and emphasizes empathy and concern and care for civilians, and at the same time, then people in the United States need health care. I mean, it's shocking that the
Hmm.
most powerful nation in the world has no health care. It's
Yeah.
it's stupefying. So we don't need Obamacare. We don't need all these band-aids, these pretend you know transformative projects that do nothing but further increase the profit margin for big pharma and big hospital chains and so forth. You need a genuine change at every level in healthcare, in mental health care. You need to stop treating the population, the poor, the unemployed, as the enemy. And when people are given some kind of chance at social mobility and a life of some dignity, uh, because it's interesting, the George Floyd murder. Those cops had previously had jobs at McDonald's and Home Depot and Target. They stocked shelves at grocery markets. One was a military guy, the lead man who's been indicted for murder, Chauvin. But the others were,
Yeah.
because those are the jobs. Those are the only jobs available. Crappy minimum wage temp work for the working class. That has to change. There has to be some way that people are given a life that isn't humiliating. Nobody wants to get up and go flip burgers at a fast food
Yeah.
restaurant. It's humiliating and degrading and despair inducing. That has to change. That simply has to change. And defund the police, defund the military, and uh, break down the entire system of imperialist power. Stop interfering in Venezuela and Bolivia and Syria and Iran. This is crazy. These sanctions. Stop all of that and take care of the people in your own country.
Regardless to the US election and what the outcome of the election will be, how do you see the future of the country? Will your prediction be a definite failure of the American capitalist system?
The optimistic part of me um, wants to
Hmm.
believe that certain grassroots organizations. I have a son who works in as one of the leaders of a group that is for prison abolishment, and it works out of Southern California. And I see the work they do, and
Hmm.
a lot of the previously incarcerated ex-offenders are involved in that, and it's inspiring, and it has made a
Yeah.
concrete um, uh, step in helping people. I mean, in very material, concrete ways, people have benefited, and yet it's just the beginning of chipping away at this whole edifice, this monstrous edifice of inequality and oppression. The more pessimistic side of me thinks that eventually those groups will be kind of squashed out, um, and we're seeing this dream of people microchipped, mass total surveillance, invasion of privacy, people being increasingly restricted in their movements and ability to do anything,
Hmm.
and we're entering a very Orwellian phase of digital imprisonment in a sense, and that's unfortunately, probably the more likely outcome. But I hope people will start waking up and resisting. I hope that enough information gets out about the ridiculous hysteria around the COVID event, and people will start to question authority more, question the official voices, the official newspapers. Don't trust the New York Times. People, don't trust them. They lie. They have the same interest as the rest of the ruling class. So that has to happen. Educate people, and it's vitally important. People start questioning these things and looking into such stuff themselves, and coming to some conclusions that will lead to resistance. People have to resist what's happening right now.
At the end, if you would like to add something more, I'm all ears.
It's been a great interview. Thank you for having me. I think that
Thank you very much.
just that, again, we see this perfect storm of this pandemic, and um, uh, the racist policing that's so out of control now, and the vast inequality in the U.S. and homelessness, loss of jobs, this massive depression. It's downplayed in the media, and all I can say to people who are not in the U.S. is it's worse than you think. So that's my final comment.
Thank you for joining us, and I do appreciate due to your noteworthy remarks, and I hope things are going well with you and your work far away from anything negative. Thank you, John, and goodbye. Dear audience, it was another talk with John Steppling, writer and commentator from Norway, on the triangle of the corona crisis, the economic crisis, and anti-racist protest in the United States, and its impact on the presidential election. Thanks for watching, and catch you later.